Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 263, interview with Brenda Ulrich from Textbook and Academic Authors Association. So I'm very lucky to have Brenda with me today, and we are going to talk a little bit about a number of things, including the organization, which as you know from our weekly episodes, is our only sponsor this year, but also about the Textbook and Academic Authors Association Summer Institute that is new for us in 2026 because Brenda is one of our presenters. So we're going to open it up, and I'm going to have Brenda just talk a little bit about Textbook and Academic Authors Association, some of the benefits, what are some things she's doing with it, and then we'll jump into the Institute. So Brenda, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. It's great to be participating. So I just want to step back a little because I'm a little unusual as a TAA member because I am not a textbook or academic author. I am in fact an attorney, a publishing attorney, and I have worked with many textbook and academic authors over the years, many of whom are TAA members. I've been involved with the organization, I think 10 years at this point.
Wow.
And it began when I went to a conference in San Antonio. And since then, I've attended the conferences and eventually became a board member, and have been very active with the group. I think it's a great organization, and I don't just say that because I'm on the board. I say that because I've heard it from so many members. I think it's unique because it is not field specific. So I think most textbook and academic authors are in academia, where most of your interactions are with people in your field, in your department, and your conferences are tied to your field and your department. And this organization is really about writing and the writing process and supporting authors in that. And in addition to supporting authors in their writing, there's so much more. It's really about supporting them in the career of being a textbook and academic author. And I think that's where sort of industry people like me come in, where we can assist with the legalities, the legal issues, signing contracts, other copyright questions, those kinds of things from my perspective. There's also people who advise on marketing and, all the other things that come apart from sitting down at your computer to write. I think is where TEA really supports and has a really active community. And I think that's the other thing. People always comment about the support they get from fellow members, from the staff, from the presenters, that it's just a very warm and welcoming and supportive environment for those who are members. And for what you get for your membership, for what it costs and what you get, I think it's just one of the best out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning that because I think this is one thing that we don't think about with our academic organizations about how do we negotiate things like book contracts. So I'm now working on a fifth book, and a lot of what I know about negotiating a contract, I either learned the hard way or I was lucky enough to have a mentor somewhere along the way that sort of explained things to me, like, what does it mean when you get certain percentages of royalties? And what does it mean when you actually like own the rights to your work and in all these things. So yeah, I love that there's an organization out there, and I've said this many times on the podcast, but I have zero interest in any kind of like commercial sponsorship of the podcast or our organization of Defend, Publish, and Lead in that kind of a way. And that's partially because I want to make sure we're protecting academic authors' interests from everything from productivity to publishing. And TAA, I think, is one organization that really does a solid job at just explaining things to us and not assuming that we know things from our graduate programs, because as we know, graduate education is kind of uneven.
Yeah.
So, what I want to talk about next is the TAA Institute for 2026. So, Brenda is one of our speakers, and I just thought if you want to just take a few minutes and talk about what is it that you are presenting on, and then who might benefit, or what are some of the benefits of going to this session?
Sure. So I'm doing, it's funny, I've presented on various topics at the conferences over the years. And a couple years ago, I did a sort of speed version of top 10 tips for publishing contract negotiations. And Kim Pollock, the executive director, and I were discussing it. And even in just a couple of years that have passed, so much has changed in the industry with the advent of generative AI that, some things haven't changed. I'm going to talk about those, but we thought enough has changed that it really does affect your contract, especially if you are negotiating new contracts. So I'm doing a kind of expanded 2.0 version of that. So I'm still going to talk about sort of the fundamentals of any negotiation, any contract negotiation, because some of those are just true across the board. How to be prepared, the right mindset, how to tactically approach these things. Some of what I will talk about will be specific to the dynamics of a contract, publishing contract negotiation, because the relative negotiating power of the parties and understanding the nature of the contract and who you're dealing with at the other end. That can be sort of specific to publishing and academic publishing industries. And then I will get into even more particulars about the specifics in the contract that you want to be thinking about, looking at, and how best to kind of negotiate so those are best for you.
Yeah, sounds great. So, one of the things that I think would be really helpful here is that I think, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think your session would probably appeal to both brand new, like I've never written a book before, I want to know what the heck is happening there, along with veteran authors. Because I think you're right in thinking through how the landscape has changed. I've mentioned on this podcast many times since I talk about writing productivity all the time, but I'm in the middle of completing a book on academic sabbaticals, and I know this time around, thinking through like how does everything work, what happens with an advanced contract, but I know just from working on a book this time that even 5, 6 years ago, things like considering like where images are reproduced and how even parts of a book can get carved up and then put in a different spot. That wasn't with this book on sabbaticals. It was with another edited collection that I had come out earlier this year. But it's like things that I hadn't even considered because thinking through like say an edited collection, I kind of think of it as a discrete unit. Like it's one thing. I'm an editor with my co-editors, and we all have chapters and things like that, and we all did the negotiation, but I don't think about the chapters being split off from us or the overall frame from the book. So even in things like writing the book, thinking that, hey, at any moment, any part of this content could be moved somewhere else. Like that's all in those contracts,
Yeah.
which, when I signed for the other book, I didn't necessarily understand totally what I was dealing with there. And I think part of this is just that a lot of content is like doled out to libraries and they get just some of the chapters but not the whole book, and then some people are buying the whole book. So it sounds like your session is probably appealing for authors everywhere just because of the changing landscape. Is there anything else you want to add about it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point because these things are happening in the industry to all books, right? There's both the kind of pulling apart of the content, and I think it's even just the way we talk about books is changing because a lot of the time books are treated as content that can be, diced and spliced apart in different ways and then packaged with other things. And then in addition, we have things like subscription services and inclusive access that your book is not just pulled apart necessarily, but also bundled with a lot of other things in its entirety. And then that leads to questions of how are payments made to authors whose works are used in those contexts. And those issues affect everybody. They affect the brand new author. They affect the person on their 10th edition of their book. And I think I have so often had authors say to me, I wish I had known before I signed, some of these things.
Yeah.
And, it's always after you sign is I can't help you. So, I think, for a new author, I mean, forewarned is prepared, whatever that phrase is. So, if you know about textbook contracts, even before you're looking at one, it will help you with when one shows up on your door, how to think about it, how to read it, what you're looking for. Certainly, if you're contemplating, if you have been offered a contract or you think that's coming soon, you want to get ahead of thinking about that. But then the other thing is many, established authors, they have new amendments for new editions of their books. So you may still be negotiating contract language at any stage of the process. And also a lot of publishers are trying to move authors of older books to newer contracts. And that has its own set of sort of pitfalls. Why do they want to change my contract? Well, it was drafted in 1992 and things have changed a little, and often it makes a lot of sense. But, there's also potential, issues or problems that you might not spot as you're looking at this new contract. Because one thing I can guarantee is that whatever newer contract is being proposed to you will be a lot longer and more complicated than the one you signed in 1992. So, understanding this much more dense language is also a challenge.
Yeah, and this is also, I would argue, one more reason to go to this TAA Institute, especially for that session. Because even veteran authors, as I mentioned in my case, I've looked at a lot of contracts and a lot of them recently, since a lot of the books that I've done have all stacked up on top of each other. There's definitely language in there that I wasn't 100% sure that I knew what it meant. So, yeah, I think this is really helpful. And we've talked about how the organization itself is really supportive in sort of this extra curriculum that we don't really know necessarily as academic authors or textbook authors. So, yeah. All right, Brenda. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode for Defend, Publish, and Lead podcast. And for anybody that's interested in joining Brenda and I at the TAA Institute, I will put the registration link in our show notes, but registration did open on January 1st. And just as a reminder for any of our podcast listeners, if you are a new person joining TAA, you can actually join the organization for $25 for the whole year. It is my cheapest academic membership. And to do that, you would just use the code capital D, capital P 25 to get that discount. And if you have any trouble with it, let me know. We'll also drop that in the show notes. Happy writing, everybody.